You don't have your gun on your table
Mm.
so that your child can play with it, right?
Right.
So technology is a tool, but it can do a lot of good, but it can also be disastrous.
Before we understand AI's role, we have to first understand ourselves.
AI has huge potential, and I'm very optimistic about it because both from a personal and professional reason. But it also has a lot of risk. AI has no data source except for humanity, right? It's learning from humanity. So whoever is putting the data, that's what it's learning from. We're all biased, whether we want to be or not, because depending on where we grew up, depending on where we live, the kind of food we eat, the people we interact with, the kind of work we do, it shapes us, right? To be unbiased, you have to almost like put yourself into somebody else's shoe and some other place, which is very difficult to do.
Hi, Zany. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, artificial intelligence and automation are foundationally disrupting business. When you try to look even just a few years into the future, we know these changes are only going to keep coming, but it can be perplexing to know where do you begin when it comes to preparing for those changes? Or even, how about this? How to think about our role as humans when it seems like AI increasingly takes on more of what we do. Well, I'm excited to introduce you today to Faisal Hoque. Faisal is the author of a new book entitled Transcend, Unlocking Humanity in the Age of AI. Now, there are plenty of books on AI and even on the human AI relationship, but after reading this book, I don't think you'll find one that is more thoughtful and I'll say usefully philosophical. Faisal is the founder and #1 Wall Street Journal and USA Today best-selling author with 10 award-winning books to his name. He's been named among the top 100 most influential people in technology and one of the top 100 thought leaders by Trust Across America, Trust Around the World. And beyond all that, he's a deeply insightful author who can help us think about what does it mean to be human in a world that is increasingly impacted by AI. It's a discussion that I can't wait to share with you. A quick note, I want to invite you to join our Lead 52 family. It's a global group of leaders who are committed to transforming our ability to lead and deliver. It's 52 weeks of leadership learning delivered right to your inbox, taking less than 5 minutes a week, and it's all for free. Learn more and sign up at getlead52.com. Thanks. Let's jump into our discussion with Faisal about his new book, Transcend. Hey, Faisal, thank you so much for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, really been looking forward to this. We'll get into ideas from your book in just a bit, but I'd love for people to hear more about your backstory because it's pretty fascinating from what I've learned in the research. Can you think of anything from your, let's say, your family culture or experiences growing up that helped form you into who knew would turn into one of the world's leading management thinkers and technologists?
Look, I mean, I think everybody's journey is unique, and we all have our own stories, and
Hmm.
you kind of start somewhere, end up somewhere else. I mean, that's the beauty of life, right?
Yeah.
And in between, you have lots of ups and downs, and you learn from your adversity, and you have jump off point or pivotal points that changes you. So in my case, I grew up in Bangladesh as a child, came to US when I was 19, and then started my school here in US. I started in engineering and computer science. Then I started my career in my senior year because I developed a software product. And then, worked for a couple of pretty large Fortune 500 companies. Started my first company, started my second company, got fired from my second company. Investor took it over, run it to the ground. And then I started my next company, and this is where I started writing. That was almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I had the chance to travel all over the world. When I was a child, I was deeply, grounded in Bengali and Sanskrit literature and philosophy. I never thought that it will prop his head up like it has now, because
Right.
it makes me think about a lot of things
Yeah.
that are kind of grounded in that. And then I had exposure to Zen Buddhist culture from my Japanese friends, and I spent some time in Japan. So it kind of weaved into my thinking process, and I try to maintain a balanced perspective. I don't get. I'm deeply passionate and optimistic, but also at the same time, I'm very, cautious and
Mhm.
risk. Kind of weighing the risk that anything brings to the table. I don't think there is anything in the planet that's all good and it's all bad.
Mm.
It's always some. The truth is somewhere in between. So it's kind of stay there.
You know what I find sometimes is sometimes when someone has a philosophical bent, it it it's interesting, but we suffer from practical. This book kind of brings in moderation in both of those, right? I mean, that really
Sure.
is your
Yeah.
mindset, not just what is interesting as thought experiments, but how about these thought experiments and then applying it into real world and turn it into
Yeah.
frameworks that which is you do that a lot, right?
Yeah, look, because I'm a system thinker, I'm a technologist. I've been exposed to codes and logic at very early stage, as much as I've been exposed to philosophy, literature, whatever you want to call, and along the way, because of my work experience in all parts of the globe, and with a pretty sizable, complex organization, both in private sector and in public sector, I met quite a bit of wide variety of people. So
Mhm.
people, you cannot take the people element
Right.
off it. So a lot of my thinking, it comes from philosophy and humanity and human interaction and impact on human, but you can't take the system thinking out of me. So
Right.
I have to kind of like mold things around. Okay, how do you really decode,
Yeah. Right.
a scenario and put together a guide map to move forward.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of like a problem solving, approach, and we know that there's when you talk about AI and you talk about future, and especially if you talk about where we are standing right now, April 11, 2025. I mean, it's a major uncertainty across the globe from many perspectives, right? I mean, there's conflict zones, there is economic uncertainty, there's new technology coming in the play. So all of that creates a lot of agita in
Yeah.
people, right, in general. So and a lot of these technologies are evolving, so we
Mhm.
don't know what they're going to be. So what I try to do is that I don't look at a technology as an endpoint. It's ever evolving, but can you create a thought pattern that allows you to tackle with whatever that comes next, right? So
Right.
so you talked about being practical and useful. So we developed this open and care methodology or framework rather, whereby you can be radically optimistic about future innovation, and you can kind of look at different ideas. And out of the ideas, I know a lot of your folks are audience comes from project and portfolio management background. So it's we prescribe how do you create an innovation portfolio, and then but at the same time, how do you care deeply about humanity? So that's where the care comes in, and kind of weave program, project, but also enterprise and individual risk management, so that you kind of protect yourself, right? So this duality, and
Yeah.
it goes back to that middle ground. You can be optimistic, but you can also mitigate risk at the same time.
Yeah.
One
I
doesn't
love
really work without other.
I love that in the book. It's a theme throughout it all. I think a question that lurks in the minds of a lot of us is like, what's the role that humans play in this world of increasingly saturation of AI and robotics? And something I took away from your book is that before we understand AI's role, we have to first understand ourselves. And you
Yeah,
write that the core value of humanity is our ability to make choices about what matters to us, not necessarily our uniqueness, but our freedom. If I read it right, that's kind of how I
yeah,
took it. So,
yeah.
how's that helped you think about the role of human and technologies from that frame?
Yeah, because what we do individually and what we do as an organization or what we do as a government agency, it's
Yeah.
all about choices, right? So
Yeah.
let's take very simple day-to-day individualistic example, right? I mean, you can choose to glue to social media,
Mm.
or uh, completely outsource yourself to a certain extent to all kind of this natural language generative AI thing that just popped up in last 12 to 24 months, or you can constantly force yourself with critical thinking process, right?
Yeah.
And as an organization, you can decide, okay, you might have seen that we talk about these four P's, the product, people, planet, and purpose. So you can start with like, well, what's the purpose of what we're doing, and how does that impact people and the planet, and how do we go about creating maximum value and reduce the risk, right? So
Hmm.
these are all choices, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, you can be authentic, and I mean, we all know that each person, each organization, each leader, each government agency, each government are unique, and there's a lot of cultural element that plays a role. But the choice is what drives what we do, what we don't, right? So once we give up that choice to something else, then it will enter a different
Yeah.
facet of human history, and this is where the interesting dichotomy comes in, because as we know that AI has huge potential, and I'm very optimistic about it because both from a personal and professional reason. But it also has a lot of risk, right? So I mean, we have never been at a juncture where we created something that has ability to think faster, do things fast, physically do things faster, compute faster, and to a certain extent, maybe even have. I mean, already it has ability to supersede our intelligence, right? I mean, there's already people are forming personal relationship with AI agents and professional relationship with AI agents. So to what extent we outsource all that is really the bigger questions, right? So and it applies to anybody. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't skip this.
And what I thought was interesting in that whole section was, I think intellectually we can be like, oh yeah, make choice. That makes sense. But sometimes we don't realize how even autocomplete, like you said in the book, is maybe nudging us towards a choice that we don't even realize sometimes. Right. So it's not
Yeah.
necessarily taking our choice away, but if we're not careful, optimistic as well as defensive, we might realize some choices are being taken away. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a um, if we don't, I mean, it's very easy to outsource yourself, right? What I mean by that, it's not just autocorrect. Think
Mhm.
about, I mean, less and less people knows how to read a map because you're so hooked into GPS, right?
Right.
GPS on your phone, GPS in your car, and then think about like, okay, I want to have dinner. It's Friday night. I want to have dinner. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Yelp and see, okay, what is trending, or what's has the biggest likes, and I'm going to go there. Versus if I just randomly start driving around without the GPS in my neighborhood and see which, what's there. Is there
Yeah.
something new? I
Yeah.
mean, so this is like, and then like, let's say you finish the dinner and you come home and you want to watch a show. You turn on your Amazon Prime or Netflix or whatever you subscribe to, and it's pushing content that you like, quote unquote, you like,
Mm.
because it's recognizing your pattern, right? So
Yeah.
these are the subtlety of choices being made for you versus you're making choice. So if you want to maintain your human faculty, or human agency rather, and decision making and critical thinking process, then you almost have to force yourself not to do that. and
Mhm.
and and that's an exercise. It's a mindful exercise. It's like when you meditate, you say, okay, I'm going to shut my mind, and I'm just going to focus on this particular moment. So I think that element of humanity is going to become even more critical.
I have to say, as I reflect on this, a lot of my early impressions on AI came from sci-fi movies, like 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? HAL, iRobot, Star Trek, things like that. And
Mhm.
you write in the book how these narratives, they can kind of distort how we approach or even think about real world AI. So how do you think some of these cultural myths continue to shape our thinking about AI today?
I think that if you look at the human history, right, these kind of fantasy or sci-fi or
Mhm.
or stories, it does and have shaped humanity and human history, right? So and it often become reality. I mean, think about just the flip phone. You mentioned Star Trek,
Right. Right.
flip phone
Right.
I mean, our tablets, right? They have all come true, right? I mean,
Mhm.
we also now have autopilot on planes long time. We are now having self-driving cars. So a lot of those gets fulfilled. And then, I mean, even you talk about HAL or whatever. I mean, if you look at that NVIDIA's the recent announcement of System 1 and System 2, they're having this standalone IoTs or Internet of Thing humanoid robots that connects to the internet and very self-contained, small language model and large language model, and is going to learn from the patterns and behavior of whoever is interacting with it. Those are kind of sci-fi.
Mhm.
So I don't think we're too far away from sci-fi. You're already seeing people forming relationship uh, I mean, I don't mean just romantic relationship.
Mhm.
Like it's some sort of a, okay, I want to, schedule my calendar or book a flight or tell me what should I buy for my wife or my child is sick. These are the symptoms. What shall I do about it, right? So these are forming a dependency and relationship, right? Some would be hugely helpful. Imagine getting up 3 o'clock in the morning with a screaming child because they have a stomach virus or something. Is super helpful. And we have been kind of using Google for that. It's gotten to the, our search engine. Now it's gotten to the next level. So some of those things are going to be hugely helpful. Like, I mean, even in my personal example, I've loaded up all my content in a large language I mean, it's a self-contained model
Yeah.
so that I can say, okay, uh, show me what I wrote in 2002 about, let's say, project management, and it will pull up stuff. And I said, okay, now update it with what I recently wrote in Transcend, and it will formulate something. And sometimes it will hallucinate and pull up stuff from God knows where, and it doesn't make sense,
Right.
right? But it is helpful in terms of fast research, right?
Yeah.
And then other day I was playing with this notebook LM from Google thing,
It's
and I
fun.
said, okay, convert my article into a voice discussion, and two AI persona, is kind of discussing my article, and my wife walked in and she said, "Who's describing this?" I said, "Who do you think?" He said, "Did you just do the podcast or something?" I said, "No, it's a fictitious AI generated content with AI generated voice and personality."
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting, intriguing. It's
Yeah.
very futuristic, but it's also
Mhm.
frightening because we're
Yeah.
not used to this, right?
Right.
So,
Like their voices are remarkably good at little mistakes or stutters
mhm.
or how they interrupt each other. Yeah, that's good. You talk about the relationships. You talk about AI personas in the book.
Yeah.
And for just to get listeners up to speed, like how would you describe what AI persona is, and how have you personally used them beyond what we've talked about?
Sure. I mean, AI persona is basically what roles and personality do you want to give to a AI agent?
Yeah.
Actually, the idea of persona comes from organizational psychology and organizational structure, where you say, okay, you may be playing a role as a project manager. I may be playing a role as a product manager, right? I mean, it's a similar skill set, but not quite the same, right?
Mhm.
And it requires different kind of thinking process, different kind of output, a different kind of way of doing things, interacting, whatever, right? So when we talk about AI agents, you will be able to, you are already kind of craft what that agent's persona should be. So
Yeah.
for a simple example, you can say, okay, I have a CRM system, but I have a AI agent whereby the persona of that AI agent is a level one call center agent, right? So it's basically saying, okay, I call up this number, and it just, you've seen that on the
Sure.
voice text, things, which was Cluzy is getting better and better. But there is now increasingly pretty sophisticated AI agent that's playing that role. That is the sole purpose of that particular AI agent and persona. It's not going out there and looking for flowers for your wife or whatever. It's very confined, right, and constrained, and it has a particular role in it. So that's what I mean by persona. So
Mhm.
depending on what you want to use it for, and how what purpose you want to fulfill, you're going to define different persona, right? It could be a research agent, it could be an executive assistant, it could be a psychologist, it could be a call center agent, whatever, right? So that's the emergence. And what will also happen, you're going to even see persona who are managers, who are really AI agent that's going to allocate work based on whatever you're asking. So you can say, I want to create this project, so create a team. So the persona that persona's role is to create team based on the problem you're trying to solve, and it will put together the job descriptions and best fit and background, and depending on how the models were created, this is where also bias will come in. So
Right.
you may say,
Right.
well, only people who can do this who went to Ivy League school and got a PhD, as an example, right? Well,
Right.
that's biased, because that's not everybody needs to go to Ivy League school and get a PhD to do something, right? So this is where, when I say, don't really, outsource all your freedom,
Right.
that's what I mean. It's a both professional and personal level.
When you mentioned bias, I thought of something from your book where, like, I've often thought of AI as a tool for sure, a collaborator for sure. For example, I like the metaphor of thinking of these chatbots as like an intern or an assistant. If they don't get things perfect, you don't go, "You're a bad intern." You're like, "Hey, thanks for the first draft," or something like that. But you go further describing AI not just as a tool or collaborate, but also as a mirror, which I thought was
Yeah.
interesting. So, would you explain what you mean by that and why that's
Yeah, I
really an
mean,
important consideration?
absolutely, because I mean, we're all biased, whether we want to be or not, because depending on where we grew up, depending on where we live, the kind of food we eat, the people we interact with, the kind of work we do, it shapes us, right? To be unbiased, you have to almost like put yourself into somebody else's shoe and some other place, which is very difficult to do. It's not. It goes in human nature, right? Because we're being shaped by the things we see, the data we consume, the culture we're, whatever, right? So, like, if you live in New York City, seeing a multicultural metropolitan environment is normal to you, right? But let's say you went to a remote village in Bangladesh, that's not the case, right? So I mean, so it forms a bias, right? So the person who's arranging the data or putting the data, and because AI has no data source except for humanity, right? It's learning from humanity. So whoever is putting the data, that's what is learning from, right? So if you are, let's say you create a large language model, which is, I mean, let's say again in a remote village in Bangladesh, you're gonna have point of view of that particular group of people, versus you have people who are creating the AI is learning from that particular data source in New York City. You're gonna have a different kind of data set, right? So
Mhm.
you may say, "What's my favorite food?" or "What's the most favorite food of the people?" And you'll say, "Okay, it could be hamburger, or it could be spicy fish that caught freshly," right? So it depends
Mhm.
on
Right.
so that's what I mean by mirror, and
Yeah.
it can be very good and very bad. So as you may remember, I mean, in the book we talk about, look, humanity given us Einstein, and it has given us Miles Davis. It has given Tagore, but it also given us Genghis Khan and Hitler and all kind of really nasty characters that repeatedly tried to divide us and destroy the planet, right? So it all depends, so depending on who is using it, feeding it, learning from it, it's going to give you back exactly that. Because just
Yeah.
try it. Like, if you go to ChatGPT and start asking, I am of this descendant, tell me what my favorite food is, it's going to tell you exactly that. Or that's what I'm in my dinner, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know,
It's interesting.
so
Yeah. Yeah. Whenever I hear somebody say, "But these chatbots are biased," well, is there bias on the internet? Right? Like,
yes, of
right?
course.
So it's a
Yeah.
mirror. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
and then I mean that is the point, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's it just enhanced because now it's it's regenerating faster than, let's say, if you look at internet or any other technology aside from what we're seeing in generative and these predictive models, is that they're kind of like a passive technology. This is more of an active technology, right? So it's actively learning, actively interacting with you. That's how you can form this relationship. So in the internet, even like go backward like 5 years or 10 years, you would go and search for something. It will give you the search, and you're done, right? It's not telling you anything beyond that. It's not interacting with you in a natural language, right? So
Right.
so because of the natural language and the computing power and the vast data sources, it has become much more pronounced. So, I mean, is it biased? Of course. I mean, look at the data. We already talked about the
Right.
the news you consume, the food
Right.
you eat, the
Right.
show you see,
Yeah.
kind of people you're interacting with. It's all in a kind of echo chamber, right?
Mhm.
So it's only
For
going to
sure.
get pronounced, and this is where the choices comes in.
Right.
Do you
For
want to
sure.
be
Yeah.
that, or you want to be something else?
So interesting. Listeners need to get a copy of the book to get a full understanding of your models and frameworks, but like open and care that you already mentioned. But just to get a sense of what you offer in the book, I wonder, is there like a high level version that you could introduce us to open just to give people a sense and
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
use an
sure.
example that's maybe oriented towards an individual, not a business or government?
Sure. Look, I mean, I think same principle applies. The
Mhm.
open, it's really there's many sub methodology behind open, right?
Right.
But at a very high level, it allows you to outline what is it that you want to do, as a purpose. Then you say, what are the potentials that you can pursue, and then you say, okay, how do I experiment with all this? And then you say, okay, and then how do I navigate that experimentation in reality, right? So that's kind of how it's structured. So you can say, look, I want to write. So why do I want to write? Is it that I want to make money from writing? Is it that I want to write a book? Is it that I'm writing a technical paper? Whatever the case may be, right? And then you can say, okay, what's the fastest way I can write it? And then better question is, what is the most creative and unique way I can write it, right? So those are different questions. Faster doesn't necessarily means it's most creative or whatever the case may be. So whatever your priority is, based on that, you can say, okay, well, I have these different ideas, which really can become a portfolio of ideas. I can use that word, like these are options, right?
Sure.
So
Right.
these are the different things, and you can say, okay, option in portfolio one, I have these options. Portfolio two, I have these options based on my needs. And then you can say, okay, let's experiment a particular tool that can support a particular AI engine or particular type of AI technology that can support that, right? So you're experimenting and you're learning from it. Once you've done that, then you say, okay, I've done the experimentation. I kind of settled on one or two things, and then you kind of start, navigating the implementation of it and learn from the process of doing it, right?
Yeah.
And then you kind of adjust and adapt. And then, in between, you can also add in that care methodology, which is really about risk management. So if you say, look, if I use a particular engine to write something, what's the risk? Is it that I'm no longer writing? Is it that I'm citing wrong citation? Is it that I'm really not living up to my full potential of creativity? Whatever the case may be, that's what you're exploring. So the methodology, or the framework rather, helps you guide that process, right? Then you can use it any way you want. I mean, this is not one size fits all kind of a model. Depending on who you are and your aptitude and your need, you adjust the way you want to adjust. And by the way, same approach applies to organization, right?
Yeah.
Because you put together a strategy and then you kind of say, okay, how does this strategy meets my purpose? And then, et cetera, et cetera.
the people listening to us will recognize it as a very agile approach. They'll recognize it, and I think they'll like it because of that. But
Yeah.
one that I thought was interesting is in this section on open, you talked about how to be a better partner, and you actually mentioned emotional intelligence. And I don't normally think of emotional intelligence as something you want to really think of when you're talking about AI, but it did make me wonder: do you use please, thank you, and other phrases when you are using generative AI?
Well, it's so when you can, but more so, what I mean by that is it's really tuning to your purpose
Mm,
and being empathetical to the purpose that you are driving for yourself and for others. And that's where the emotional intelligence comes in, and you have to say, okay, based on that, what AI partner should I be using? Because they're going to be co-creator, they're going to be they're already, as I said, it's many ways it's a new
right.
digital species, right? So
Yeah.
so I don't mean that being empath. I mean, so listen, AI doesn't have any kind of emotional. Um, it doesn't have emotion, right? So I mean, it's a pattern recognizer
Right.
and generating a new pattern based on known patterns, right? So from that perspective, it's not about being kind to that. It's being kind to yourself and kind to the audience that your service, that you're supporting or producing for, and crafting which AI partner or engine and human partner that will help you to achieve
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
thing.
That makes sense. We won't go through care in any sort of detail, but I was interested in this because I feel like everything I've been taught uh, is avoid catastrophizing. That you get yourself in trouble when you catastrophize. But the C of care is that. So why have you found it to be helpful to leverage catastrophizing as a tool, which I thought was really interesting in the book?
Look, I mean, it's helpful to think about the disastrous situation because this comes from me as an entrepreneur, but this also comes from, I spent last 8 years with our military, meaning U.S. military, various parts of U.S. military and DoD, and you think a lot of worst case scenarios, right?
Yeah.
Whether that's a conflict zone, whether it's natural calamity, whatever, right? This natural disaster, you think from that point of view. Because if you cannot think about the worst case scenario, you can't really prepare for it, right?
Right.
So you have to kind of think about those things, and then say, okay, and based on that, you have to also kind of decide what is your level of risk tolerance, right? So
Mhm.
you say, okay, look, and I know this as an entrepreneur. I mean, there's personal, professional risk that you take, and how much is too much, and how little is too little. You don't want to be risk adverse, but you don't also want to jump off the cliff because you may not ever get there. So that's where if you can think about the worst case scenario, then you can do proper level of risk management.
Yeah.
It's not being a doomer
Right.
or having a mentality of doomerism, but it's a really a risk management practice.
Yeah, I feel like after reading it, it's just a good way to identify risks. It just
Yeah,
doesn't mean we have to prepare for all of them because your section there is just like classic project risk management. You look at okay,
yes.
now I'll across all of those. What's the probability? How bad would it be? And just is sorted out. So I just thought it was kind of interesting. A theme that recurs in the book is to detach and devote, which I kind of took that as encourage us to detach from what's harmful and devote ourselves to what matters, something along those lines. So to help us
And things
understand,
like that. Yeah,
yeah,
look, I mean,
what's an example of how you've done that?
sure. Look, I mean, detach and devote comes very much from a Buddhist philosophy, right?
Yeah.
So, because the idea is that you have to detach yourself from noise,
Mhm.
and you have to devote yourself that does not do harm, but that actually has an impact to other people and to yourself, right? So
Yeah.
that's where the detach and devote comes from. So you have to kind of stay devoted to your purpose and what the value that you're trying to create that has impact on other people, and you have to kind of detach from doing things that will be harmful, that would be addictive, that could be, that could a particular solely in let's say profit driven, or just driven by your own good, but it has no value to other people.
Mm.
All that stuff has a individual, organizational, and societal impact. So on an individual level, just like you're saying, I try not to outsource myself.
Yeah.
That's a detachment, right?
Yeah.
I try to stay devoted to cultivating my critical thinking process, because if I don't, then I won't be able to do what I do. I won't be able. I'm a creator. I like to create.
Mm.
So I'm using AI to do research, but I cannot write the way I write if I was using AI, right? So I mean, because most of my stuff is deeply personal,
Right.
and it's motivated by most people who writes and work with the research team. It's always deeply personal because you encounter a problem, or you've seen a particular personal situation, and you kind of get inspiration from that. So that's what you want to stay devoted. You want to devote it to your own experience and your journey, and then create something out of it that may be meaningful for other people.
It's not exactly the E of care, but I feel like, is that, if I remember right, that's exit. There's times where I'm just like, and I'm holding my phone, like I'm going to detach from the electronics. I'm just going to exit for a while and
Sure.
devote to just deep thinking time without the other
Yeah.
stuff. And it's kind of an application of that, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, at a very micro level,
Right. Yeah.
that is an example, right? I mean, so you can take it at a macro level, and you can say in an organization, it's easy to now create, let's say, a process map. You can go to some sort of a process tool, and you have a generative engine, and you say, okay, draw me a process map for blah blah blah. Well, or how about three of us go on a board and try to exercise that, how to come up with a process model. You may still go take that thinking and apply a tool so that you can create a final product, but that exercise is detachment from, as an organization, from doing that. But and you can take that example much bigger and
Right.
much more complex, as
Yeah.
you can
Yeah,
imagine.
for sure. There's so many more things I'd love to talk about, but let's end with this one. Many of our listeners are parents, and they're kind of wondering, like, how do we prepare our kids for a future so deeply shaped by AI? So, any thoughts about how we might be able to prepare our children now to transcend in the years ahead?
So the children, and actually not just children. I mean, if you look at the 20 years old or 30-year-old,
Right.
they all grew up with new technology. They're much more adaptive to new technology. They're glued to, my son doesn't have any recollection of a landline, or a land phone, right? So
Right.
he prefers texting over talking to people, et cetera, et cetera. So you got that going. And I was talking to a father who has a 6-year-old, and he was saying that, his child was playing with the Legos, and the 6-year-old pulled up the phone, took a picture using ChatGPT and other kind of AI tool to say, asking, what do I make out of this set of Lego blocks, right?
Right.
Imagine when, at least when I played with Lego, I just went there and started experimenting, right? So
Yeah.
so I mean, I don't think you cannot be not say you cannot use technology, because that's going to be actually
Right.
a
Right.
negative. They're not going to have the same level of competitive advantage. But you have to kind of take this break from that, so that you can exercise that kind of critical thinking process, right? So that's one. The second thing is that you kind of have to teach them that, just like you don't put in social media or whatever, your address and where you live and who's your parents, you cannot go on especially this generative AI engine, and start putting your phone numbers and where you live and that sort of a thing, because you're going to have a privacy issue. So you have to kind of teach them. It's like, think about, you don't put it like a 10-year-old in a car to drive, right? So
Right.
you got to kind of have to take the same kind of a mentality. Or you don't have your gun on your table,
Mm.
so that your child can play with it, right?
Right.
So
Right.
so uh, technology is a tool, but technology is a it can do a lot of good, but it can also be disastrous, right? So you have to kind of treat it with that kind of balanced way of looking at it, and you have to start teaching, not just teaching, but you also have to stay, current, because it's moving faster than it is, and often enough the children are much more aware of what's out there, and they're adapting things a lot faster than adults are, because adults don't have infinite time to do whatever they want to do. It's often children do that, right? So, and they're learning from video games, they're learning from interacting virtually, et cetera, et cetera.
I mean, it might feel like a stretch, but I honestly think open and care could work at home too, right? Like,
Oh,
hey,
absolutely.
what do we
Absolutely.
want? What's our goals? Like, let's outline
Right.
it. Yeah, I think it
Yes, you
actually
can.
could.
It's
Yeah,
like, think about, I mean, a lot of the self-help gurus have taught that you need a visioning board
right.
and you need a roadmap. So, I
Mm.
mean, you can apply that in the same context, in your personal situation, and that's why, since you have kind of gone through the book, there is this, these three sections, right? There's the AI for individual, AI for organization, and AI for government, right? So, and so we kind of apply that open and care model for all purposes.
Yeah, it works. And for those listening, you just gotten a very brief introduction to what's in Faisal's new book. If you'd like to get a helpful perspective on preparing to thrive in a world of humans with AI, get a copy of his new book, Transcend. I put links to the book and the book's website in the show notes for this cast. So, Faisal, thank you so much for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed our conversation.
A special thanks to Faisal for joining us here on episode 463 of the People and Projects podcast. I have to say, I thought it was a pretty interesting read. He, like a lot of times people bring in history into these sort of discussions, but he brought a lot of philosophy in as well, which I thought was interesting, and just a lot of practical content. I think it's difficult to weave all of those in to something that you don't just go away from and say, oh, that was interesting, but how do you apply it? I think his frameworks are very practical. And I mentioned this during the interview. Anybody who's familiar with agile approaches, I think will find his frameworks just very inviting, and in a way to approach AI optimistically, as well as from a risk management perspective, somewhat of a defensive sort of posture. And isn't that how we do projects? Like you want to optimistically go into this project, but you also want to be like, what could go wrong? And his frameworks gather both those. I think there's the issues on the tail of the distributions, because we've got a lot of people who are AI is fine, doesn't need any guardrails. Let's not slow down what's inevitable. And I still run into people that are like, well, I'm not going to use it. I think there are areas of concern, right? I mean, one person is like, just because of all the power that this takes, and that's unethical, and it does take an incredible amount of power, right? And so I understand the tales of the distribution, but I feel like books like this kind of help us kind of weave our way through this in more of a moderated position, but also in an agile sort of way. I have to say, I'm really not worried about people who are running projects being replaced by machines anytime soon. I just find that the most difficult part of our leading projects is not creating Gantt charts, or the administrative part of it, and that's work. And I think these tools can help us with that. But it's just much more of how do we interact with difficult stakeholders? How do we influence people? And in our project management classes, like in our advanced project management class, we have 2 hours on just influencing skills, an hour and a half on just dealing with conflict. And I just can't imagine a robot dealing with that anytime soon. So the key, I think, what's really important for us is do everything we can just to keep experimenting, to make sure our literacy doesn't get stagnant, because things are changing. And when I say a weekly basis, that's not hyperbole, right? So we have to force ourselves to keep learning, which is why we're doing episodes like this. If you happen to pick up a copy of Transcend, I'd love to hear what you take away from it, whether it's from the book or from today's discussion. You can reach me at show@peopleandprojectspodcast.com. I'd love to hear what you take away from it. If you like more on this topic, I put links in the show notes to 3 episodes. First of all, episode 460 with Dr. Joe Sutherland, just a couple episodes ago. And it's like, what do we need to know about AI and data and decision making. I really enjoyed that discussion with Joe Sutherland. So check that out. Episode 454 was with Dr. Christy Smith. And I thought what was interesting about that is, how is AI changing leadership? Like, what do we need to know regarding that? And then episode 437 with Nada Sanders. The name of her book is Hue Machine. Hue Machine, what that is human and machine together. And it's a good book on this idea of how do we integrate? And it's once again heavy on it's not one or the other, it's working together. It's much more this collaboration. So I invite you to check out the show notes with those links to those episodes. Hey, can I ask you a favor? If you haven't recently left a review for the People and Projects podcast, you can do that on Apple Podcasts or wherever you consume your podcasts. Just one, minute or two doing that, it just affects the algorithm to get the word out to more people. I hear from people regularly, whether they leave reviews or they say something on LinkedIn on a post or something like that. I cannot tell you how much that means to me for sure, but also the team that's involved with this. It just really makes a big difference. So if you haven't reached out in a while, I'd love to hear from you. It's show@peopleandprojectspodcast.com. On behalf of me and my team, thank you so much for joining us for this episode.